Well, welcome to the third episode of Silver Lining for Learning. We're really happy that you've chosen to join us. I'm Chris Deedy. I teach technology, leadership, and policy at Harvard University, and I'm one of the co-founders of this initiative, but it's all bottom up. It's all just individuals who are trying to work together and make a difference. I'm very excited that today's episode is about China. You can't really see it easily on the video, but I'm wearing a tie that I bought at a silk factory in Shanghai on a trip. And I've found China a continuing source of inspiration in terms of their ability to do things at scale. So I think that's an exciting part of tonight's program. My two co-hosts are Yang and Scott. So would each of you like to briefly introduce yourselves?
Scott, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Scott McLeod, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership at University of Colorado, Denver.
I'm Yong Zhang from the University of Kansas.
Great. So just a little bit about the format of each episode. Our goal is to inspire those of you who are here and then later those of you who are watching. We all want to help each other reimagine teaching and learning to get beyond the traditional models that we almost can't see because we're so used to them, and to provide hope in a time of crisis. It's a special time, and our episodes are built around how we respond in this special time. We don't want to do the traditional conference things of death by PowerPoint and panels and long talks. Rather, we're looking to establish a kind of informal and conversational dialogue. And we invite our guests to engage in personal reflections, not just to present, sort of research-based evidence. We are not advocating for any single solution. I don't think there is a single solution, but we are looking for pieces of the puzzle. So for example, the fact that China is so good at taking things to scale and reaching tens of millions of students is an important piece of the puzzle. And you'll hear other pieces of the puzzle from our guests tonight. And finally, we're a bottom-up community. We don't have a sponsor. We don't have a funder. We don't have an organization. We're just all working together to try to build a community that can take advantage of the great opportunity that we have at this time of a tremendous human tragedy. But it has a silver lining, and that's what we're about. So our episode today is about delivering education when schools are closed, lessons from China. Song-Ye Chen, who is a professor at East China Normal University, is going to provide some big picture observations at the national level in China to give us all some background on that. Spencer Fowler, who's Chief Executive Officer and Superintendent of the affiliated high school of Peking's University Dalton Academy, will talk to us not only about the challenges of running a school at a time like this, but the challenges of running a school across distance, since he is currently in Toronto. And Mina Dunstan, who's principal of the Quarry Bay Primary School in Hong Kong, will again talk about how we particularly help young children and the role of educational leadership in accomplishing that. So with that, I'm going to toss the baton to Song-Ye to present some information and ideas about what's happening large scale in China.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yes, good morning from me. Yeah, to all the audience, actually, it's your afternoon. And I'm sharing some of my observations of this COVID-19 educational response from China. Actually, now China is the first country went out of this kind of pandemic quarantine, this kind of the whole society quarantine. But at the same time, from the educational side, we have also gone through from the closing school to reopening the school. So half of the country's high school have already been reopened, and more in a row, and it soon we'll see this kind of the routine schooling will be resumed soon. And I'm sharing this as first, just as Chris told us, shared, that's about this scale. Yeah, China is a large scale, and I'm sharing is about this kind of the most from this public education system. And we can see that 90% of the students have already been covered in this public education system. And we have to say this emergency response from China that is covered over 200 million students and 10 million teachers from K1 to K12, college, vocational schools, even kindergartens. So we see this is kind of wider population and a diversified population, and also the school types are covered in this kind of emergency response. And one more thing I need to remind is that as what I talked about, the teachers, they are associated with this public education system. So their pay are undisrupted during the COVID-19, and they are highly resourceful and very committed. This is what I have already observed. And briefly, I will just summarize this kind of emergency solution as kind of spectrum, because China is very huge, and this spectrum of emergency solution actually has been developed through all 4 weeks. Actually, just during our small talks before this show, this Mina shared about this. The first 3 or 4 weeks is chaotic, but however, it has already been very responsive. From the Ministry of Education, every week they will issue a responsive policy to adjust or accommodate this kind of new changes, because no one would know what will happen. And so I will briefly describe this kind of spectrum of emergency solution. The first is kind of a high-tech synchronous scheme. That is usually the teachers are using this kind of a new live streamed lectures with their students. At the same time, I have already observed this from this kind of online tutoring industry, from the market. They were more powerful to organize this kind of live streamed classes with, for example, tens or thousands students are covered at the same time. So it will need a very powerful brand. This is the internet to support it. And then this is a low-tech asynchronous scheme. Usually they will use this kind of pre-recorded lectures. They will show on TV. So this is kind of organized, like the local government, like in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Guangzhou, they use this kind of scheme. But at the same time, they will ask teachers to do this kind of very short time live streamed interaction with students. And later on, I can show about this kind of Shanghai model. And or they can just use voice technology. They don't have to do all the live stream, and you can message them. And the third solution is about no tech. For example, they will deliver all the printed textbooks to students, and they don't have to get online all the time. And the Ministry of Education emphasized from time to time that you don't need to require or ask teachers to do this kind of live stream lectures. You have various ways to use this long period of time. And the fourth is about this mixed and combined solution this is a scheme that is just like I mentioned, the Shanghai model. They will try to use half of their delivery just from this shared recorded lessons. This have been shared by those master teacher, one master teacher for one course, shared by the whole city's students of the same grade. But at the same time, their own class teacher are required to do this kind of interaction. Yeah, so they will have this mixed. And the last one is about the personalized solution in case they don't have any because of this kind of internet accessibility or other family issues. For example, for doctors, if they were sent to Wuhan and then they will have this kind of personalized solution, they will send a class teacher or volunteer tutor to help them. So this is the general picture. Thank you, Chris.
That's very helpful. And what I'm hearing is a tremendous amount of diversity here, that it's not one uniform model. China's a huge country. Regions are very different from one another. Families are very different from one another. And so you have a bottom-up kind of diversity of models that I think is really exciting, and that it sounds like there's something that could inform almost any viewer of this, no matter what the population of students is that they were looking at. Mm-hmm. So, Spencer, can you talk a bit about the kinds of challenges the distance provides when you're doing leadership, and whatever else you want to add in terms of how you manage educators across distance as well as students across distance?
Thank you. No, it's my pleasure to be a part of this conversation. It's been challenging, but also exciting because the programs that I'm a part of and support are so unique and diverse, and in the sense that we don't use any boxed or boxed curriculum or any teaching to any standardized exams. So then how do you maintain and nurture that when it's so bespoke and organic, depending on the teacher and their students? And initially when things were breaking in China and we had people away for Chinese New Year, we didn't want to fall in that rabbit hole where do we now implement these structures where it was going to be a standardized system for then all the teachers to follow. And we had those conversations. I'd say that the reason we're doing so well, I would argue, is because of the culture and the community that we've nurtured and people contribute to, because people have that freedom and autonomy to then decide what they're going to teach and when they're going to teach, how they're going to teach, what could be complemented, added to it, or connected there outside of the school. I think that we found ourselves in a really good spot. So the initial pushback from the faculty, the department chairs and their teachers were, no, you need to entrust and allow us to run our departments, to work with our students, to make sure that we do have a system in place that's going to support the kind of teaching and learning that they want. And so we use ClassIn, and there are certain platforms that we use, but then the teachers are allowed to add to that, and they're allowed to step outside of that. So there were some general agreements that, as opposed to having all of our classes being synchronous or asynchronous, the blend or the marriage of the two. So the faculty are meeting with their students for one synchronous class, and the other two would be asynchronous, but then the faculty also have office hours. And so there's ample time to then continue the dialogue and look at how can we connect the dots here with the knowledge and skills that we're looking for our students to understand or to master. What outside people under projects could they continue to then work with? So this has been really exciting and I think transformational for our community, because in the past we've had people working with different professors, including Harvard, to run these joint classes where then they're working with these outside expertise, but now to have classes that are fully online. So it's really pushed some people, in particular those coming from academia, to then learn and understand how to use this platform and how to use it well, when some of these academics that work in our program would argue that, the face-to-face is the most important. But people are adjusting and they're evolving. And now we have people, I would argue faculty and even students, that have really risen to this challenge. And that we've seen, for those people that perhaps weren't on our radar, really uncovering or doing amazing things. Now we're saying, wow, these people who perhaps weren't on our radar are now doing some really exciting work, that we want to continue this project. So now we have people who are raising their hands saying, I want to continue this when things are normalized, but I want to continue this project and experiment with our partner schools, sister schools, and also even to open it up to other schools around the world or people around the world. We also have a refugee scholarship where we've been bringing in someone from Syria to our campus annually. But now we're saying, we have this one person, there's a great expense that comes with that. But now what if we just open this up? We could scale this up even that much more.
I think you're making some really good points, Spencer. And one of the things I'm hearing that I think all of us who founded this believe is that online learning is not somehow inferior to face-to-face learning. It's different than face-to-face learning. And some teachers find that they really can take advantage of the differences of online, and that they appreciate the opportunity to contact students in ways that aren't face-to-face. But one of our viewers, Mark, asks, given the responsibility that teachers had and the fact that at least some of them weren't really familiar with the medium, were there special kinds of professional development or capacity building that you tried to provide for them?
We've provided some onboarding, but I would say that it's been, pretty gentle in terms of how we've been educating or supporting faculty. I mean, the one thing that's been great is that we have an ongoing dialogue with everyone. So there's admin meetings that happen weekly, there's department chair meetings that happen weekly, and then within the departments, the teachers are meeting with their department chairs. So there is this continuous conversation that can accelerate. We could have them every day, or we could give people a break if they need some time to think and play. So yes, we've looked at what kind of platforms that we're encouraging and suggesting that people use, and it allows us to then record and to keep track of the types of things that people are doing. And there has been PD, but it's mainly been coming from the department chairs and then their faculty members. And in some cases, it's the students then running PD or workshops for the faculty, because then they're wanting them to recognize that, hey, actually this platform's great, but it can only go so far. And if we adopt this, we can do so much more. We can reach more people. So it's been that amazing partnership and dialogue that is extended now with the students, the faculty, and as well the administration.
That's really exciting. So Mina, I know that many educators in the US are concerned when you start talking about online learning for young children. And some of the models also that are more asynchronous and low tech may pose challenges for young children unless their parents are really involved. But we also see sort of anguished posts from parents saying, I'm trying to do my job at home, and I'm also trying to be the teacher for 3 younger children. Help, what am I going to do? So we'd love to hear your thoughts about this and how you handle it in your own situation.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone. It's great to be talking and actually hearing some affirmations that we're going through similar things in our context. I think that certainly parental support and the relationship that you have as a school community with your parent body is absolutely critical at a time like this. And there is a need for home and school partnerships to be really genuine and authentic at a time like this. We have had to support our parents, I guess, through coming to the realization that this type of pedagogy is something that really is completely different to what perhaps the children would have on a day-to-day basis if they're in the building with us. And I think that our teaching staff have been quite inspirational actually in the way that they have been able to guide the parents and support the parents to understand that it is doable and certainly achievable for young children. I think that very early on we recognised and were quite open with our thinking together that this pedagogy is different and it's going to need to look different, because if this is going to be accessible for a young child at home, we've got to deliver it and package it in a way that that the children can make sense of it. And one of the key things that I would really encourage communities to do when they're starting to establish this type of approach would be to actually engage the parents in it. So we did a lot of surveying very, very early. So, every week we were checking back to parents. We've tried this platform and rolling this out in this particular way. Give us some feedback. And we were very much calibrating what we were doing based on what was coming in from parents. So I think at the start it was quite iterative, really, in that it was changing quite rapidly, and it was changing not because we thought we should be tinkering with it, but we were changing it based on what parents were saying to us. And the one key message that came out of those early days with parents was, it's not the what. We can see what we need to do. It's the how. How do I do this with my child? So what we would do is really think very carefully about the engagements that we were setting and really break down the instruction, if it's an instructional type task, or break down the visuals, or if it needed some kind of teacher instructional video to go with it, or jumping online and doing some lead-in video conferencing to scaffold it with the parents. That's what we were doing. So my big tip would be that school communities need to speak with their parents and get the feedback and then shape it with them. And the parents, so we've just finished 9 weeks of it on Friday. And I had so many parents in touch with me on Friday during the working hours, just saying what we've done and how it's going is amazing. And they're really quite pleased. And we've got children as young as 5 who are involved in their online tasking through our Google Sites that we've set up, and in video conferencing as a whole class, small groups, even smaller groups, and it's working because I think we've taken it slowly. We've asked people for their input along the way. We've reflected on what that might mean, and we very much thought about
You put the school into the home.
Yeah. We very much thought about the how, not necessarily the what. And I think that that's supported parents.
Yeah, because it's not possible to make every home into a classroom, and probably not a good idea. What we need to ask ourselves is, given the situation, what are the powerful kinds of learning that can take place? Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I heard from you that I think, again, is something we've talked about as co-organizers, is that education is becoming one in which every stakeholder feels that they have some ownership. The students are feeling some ownership because they're able to teach things to the teachers. The parents are feeling some ownership because they're not just getting orders from the school district. This is what we want you to do at home. And I think that that's going to be a very healthy thing in terms of the continuation of education, even past the crisis.
Yeah.
So I want to invite Yang and Scott, if either of you has a question or an issue that you'd like to pose.
Well, I was going to add the reason we invited 3 guests, as probably you know, they represent different sectors. I would like to, I think there's a question from a Tran from Vietnam, talk about the differences, because Mina School and Spencer School, they serve relatively, I think, well-to-do parents in different places. Shuangye was talking from a government perspective and rural areas. I would really like, Shuangye, can you show us some of the tough situations that people go through, and let's see if that can help us think about more innovative ways of doing this. Shuangye, you're muted, sorry.
Yes, yeah. Okay, I will show you some pictures I collected during this period. Yeah, this is the first day. Yeah, you will see this is a very fancy and a well-equipped system for teacher. For some teachers, actually, they were just look like a kind of online and anchor and very popular. But however, for most teachers, actually, this is the very first time in their life. So they were usually joking themselves as a very poorly, this poor online anchor. Yeah. And they have to improvise all kinds of equipment and this system to do this live stream. And for example, they were just use this kind of a self-made system. And then we have this, okay. Even just they will use the glass window or glass door of their washroom use as kind of whiteboard, because they are not prepared. They were not prepared to do this kind of a home-based teaching. Yeah, so, and yeah, others are just showing this students actually they are also showing the vast diversity of this family situation. This is you can say very spacious apartment, and this kid is actually doing this physical education class. However, in the village, you will see the students, they will have their own bench or desks, and just only one small screen mobile phone and to learn. And also in this Tibetan area, and this a guy from the China Telecom company, they came up and helped to build up this kind of internet facilities to ensure they are accessible. They can access the internet. However, this is all those are positive situation. And even in Wuhan, the quarantine cabin, the students were also using their pad to do this study. Yeah, this is what I can share it visually. Yes.
So just a quick one is that I think a big question when we raise those things is to say, is the truly online a lot of times necessary to drive everybody in some of the poor conditions? Just my question to raise. It's not a judgment. I just want audience, everyone else to think about this. I think, Chris, there's several audience questions you may want to address is about teacher burnout.
Yes, we are getting several questions from the audience, and we're putting a tremendous burden on teachers, not only intellectually, but a tremendous emotional burden. And I'm so inspired by the pictures because I see the tremendously great things that teachers are doing. You know, there are school districts in the United States that are just basically shutting down. They're not doing anything for anybody. And in contrast, trusting teachers to be able to come up with creative solutions, trusting families to be able to help serve their children. I think that this is very inspiring for me. But as the weeks go on and the teachers are serving as heroes for so many people, are there ways that you found that you can support them?
Chris, I'm happy to share there. I think that that's a very real issue. Teachers are engaged in the profession because they care, and I think that they have found it exceptionally challenging, most definitely on all of those levels that you've expressed. And I think that the longer it has gone on, we've seen the morale really ebb and flow. And I have to say that we did a whole staff share on late on Thursday afternoon, and I think that all of us accepted and recognized that, you know, this is going on for perhaps an indefinite period of time, and to dig deep the way we have to dig is hard. And I think that to support colleagues to be able to, I guess, reconcile that and keep pushing on is just about being authentic with each other and actually naming it for what it is. It's sometimes not ideal, but actually look for the positives that sit within it. And Spencer touched on it before, where he said that teachers that perhaps you don't always see kind of shining are actually really lifting and standing out in different ways. And I think some of those key shapers and influencers, certainly in our context, have supported other colleagues to feel the strength and the motivation to continue. And I think that it's just incredibly important that we have empathy for the children and the families at home, because they're the ones that are trying to make sense of it and be successful in it, and keeping our teachers inspired to continue moving forward has had its ups and downs. But actually, when we see the feedback coming back from the children and the work that they're producing or whatever it might be it you know, in an online video or however, I think that in itself is quite motivating. And when you feel as though you're on a bit of a dip, you get those moments and it lifts you up. And I think it's that strength in collegiality and collaboration that's helping.
Spencer, do you have things to add?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that in general, yes, I think most teachers are overworked. I think that their days packed just like students with the kind of classes that they need to be in, and there isn't much wiggle room for them to sort of be their true and authentic self, and then to work on their own sort of craft and stay healthy and focused, you know. And so I think that's something that we've been able to do well, and we try to maintain that. I think that my job would be more of being there to talk to faculty and department chairs and even admin around the clock, so that I am there supporting them, patting them on the back, giving them that love, and encouraging them to keep going, because the work that they're doing is incredible and it's so valuable. So I think that giving them the autonomy to then choose, you know, I'm going to do this one synchronous class, and this is the time that's going to work best for me. I'm in this time zone, and we're going to be looking at being in line with the Beijing or China's time zone. So I think as much as possible, making sure that we are being healthy, we are looking after these faculty. And I think that it's so important. I think that the education system in general needs to look at, you know, how many classes we expect teachers to teach, you know, a week, and then the amount of work that involves, you know. And I think that prevents the teachers from being an English teacher and being a writer, you know, your art teacher from making art, your business teacher from running their own businesses. I think that these are the things that we need to cultivate more of that. But we fill their days, and we have teachers teaching things that they're not even passionate about. So I think these are all these mistakes. So I think in this world, or in this platform now, I hope that people realize that they need that time to stay healthy, to stay zen, and to be creative, and that we need to be there as senior leaders in the school to make sure that we're there to support them. We're there to encourage them to continue taking risks with their learning and their projects, etc.
Chris,
I think
if I
that's
could
so
just-
important.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead, please.
I was just going to add one other thing briefly, touches on what Spencer has just shared. I think that the well-being of everyone is something that as a leader at this point in time, you've got to be so mindful of. So I think, you know, certainly teacher well-being, you know, family well-being, the well-being of the child is important. We've been very, very proactive in making that quite explicit to our community. So we've done online sessions for our staff so that they can actually hear from a psychologist the types of things they need to be looking for and recognizing within themselves if they're perhaps overdoing it, or they need to get some strategies that are different to manage themselves. And we've developed same sort of approach for families. We've created a wellbeing hub, and that's all about the 5 ways to wellbeing for families, to look at, you know, being active, taking notice, you know, giving, and we've put together a range of resources for them to be able to access at home. So you're sort of moving beyond your daily academic diet, so to speak, and looking much broader at what it can look like. And through that, I think what we're seeing is incredible agency from teachers and students. And I think that is really exciting, the level of agency, and then with that comes then trust and empowerment for all of those different stakeholders is really heartening, and that makes us inspired to keep going.
So one of the questions we're getting from our audience, and Song-Ye, I'm going to ask you to speak to this, is assessment. Now, we know that a lot of school systems and nations are setting aside some of the standard high-stakes summative assessments, which makes a great deal of sense. But still, obviously, diagnostic assessment that's formative for students and teachers is enormously helpful in improving the quality of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm would like Song-Ye, you to talk about this from a national perspective and a policy perspective, and then perhaps if the other two of you have any assessment strategies that you would offer to people, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, so let me share a picture first. Yeah, you will see this boy in his pajama in his own room. What was he doing with the peers? Actually, this is a tele examination. Okay, this is the situation. This have been invented during this COVID-19 in case if they were asked to do this kind of public examination, especially for the two grades. The first is the K-12, Yeah, because they are facing this public examination, the National College Entrance Examination. And in recent history, this national public examination was just announced to be delayed for 1 month. Yeah, so allow the whole population, the students in the final year to prepare for one more month. And for this kind of a K9, if they were going to the high school, senior high school, so they are still facing this kind of public examination, and they need to have this kind of a mock examination. And so when they are doing this mock examination, they're using something like this kind of video conferencing, but however, so use that kind of as a monitor and the surveillance and to do this, but they also ask the parents to collaborate and to sign this kind of agreement, and also they were do the kind of a pledge, something like that, to ensure they were very honest. They will have no cheating there. But in other ways, actually, the government's attitude is no more anxiety, no more tests. And they are going to ask those schools to start from the very beginning. They will say this kind of a zero beginning of teaching when the schools are reopened. So they will try to reduce this kind of a tax anxiety. They try to minimize this assessment. However, the teachers will still use this kind of a daily base. If they can be touched, if the students can be connected on this kind of a daily base, they will have this kind of a daily feedback to the students' homework or assignment. But usually they know, okay, this is a special time, and they will not make a kind of compulsory requirement. Yeah. So
Scott, do you have a theme that you want to bring up at this point?
Yeah, kind of spinning off of this, some thoughts that are running through my head, and we're hearing it a lot in our viewers as well, is there seems to be a qualitative difference between sort of what Spencer and Mina are talking about and the kind of pictures that Xiangye is sharing with us. So it feels like the education and the flexibility and the autonomy and the trust and the student agency that Mina and Spencer have been talking a lot about didn't feel like that was as present in the pictures that Xiangye was sharing. And I don't know if that's because of assessment or if it's more around a curriculum, right? I know that, there are provincial or city curricula that teachers are expected to follow, for example, where maybe in the international schools there may be some more curricular flexibility, for example, or something, but it seemed like the kinds of things that Spencer and Mina were talking about in terms of being able to deviate and give teachers trust and go off here, whereas it looked like we had a lot of a variety of attempts to engage in direct instruction in the pictures that were shared with us. And I don't know if that's a fair observation or not. I wonder if the three of you could talk to us about that.
I just jump in with that because I was going to invite both Xiangye, Mina, and Spencer come talk about how curriculum is being reframed. I think what Xiangye was talking about, these two grades, grade 9 and grades 12, they are very high stakes testing that determines where you go, very high stakes, so that people cannot deviate too much, and that's very most nervous. But in the other places, I think I heard from both Xiangye and Mina and Spencer about actually rethinking about the curriculum. This morning I was reading news, even the Beijing Education Commission, the government in Beijing, came up with a new announcement. In essence, I don't think those kids can return to school. So they are encouraging talk about bigger unit, merge subjects, which is actually unusual in China, which is quite revolutionary to say, we don't have time, let's just merge the subjects, merge the topics, and expand the units. We don't try to do this detailed things. I think that seems to be a forced curriculum reform. That's very interesting. And I heard a lot from Mina. Mina, you want to elaborate a lot about, because you and I talked a lot about how your staff have been thinking about what's necessary to be taught.
Yes, indeed. I mean, being a primary context, we fortunately haven't had some of those challenges around high stakes testing and cancellations that have affected other sectors. But I think for us, and this is through conversation with teaching staff, they have said quite regularly, it's really making me think, what do I need to actually be preparing for the children? What's really important for them? And we've basically had to strip out so much stuff, learning objectives, outcomes that we previously would have thought is really crucial, that, as part of this unit, we are making sure that these objectives are part of the mix. That's had to be completely stopped and upended. And I think what it's doing is sharpening teachers' minds to, this is really core learning, and this is going to stay, but lots of other stuff has to go. And that process of letting go of a lot of things, so that you're really identifying specifically what it is and what's the purpose behind it, and then designing assessments, whether it's a formative process or however it's being delivered. That's then enabling teachers to seek the feedback they need and finding out, well, actually, we don't need to spend much more time on this. We're going to take this in a slightly different direction. It's radical thinking for us at the moment. There are a group of us at Quarry Bay that are wondering, how can we keep some of these tangibles that are going on right now in our working lives and bring them back into our day-to-day working once children return to the building? And does it mean that we can actually have the permission to go forward with a lot less within the curriculum content that we're trying to deliver? And I think that the one message that I'm hearing from teachers when we're talking about it is, Mina, it's about the skills. We need to really start to be thinking about the skills that we're developing in children, more so than just looking at loads and loads of learning outcomes and objectives that perhaps previously have driven a lot of the design of learning tasks. So yes, you've got to strip it out, and it's really, really forcing us to think about the skills and the dispositions in a learner that are really key, because at this time you can't have loads of stuff in there that's getting in the way. So dispositionally, it's impacting on teachers, and teachers are thinking about that, and it's certainly the children too.
I would just like to add about assessment that, my fear was that now that we're completely virtual and we don't have students working at different labs at universities or working with different people in industry, or how can they still, but remotely or virtually, so that teachers don't feel pressure to then have the traditional quizzes and exams and papers, and I think that what's been great to see is that they're staying true to this school within a school, this experimental school, that again, we look at everything as an experiment. So to then not fall in that trap of then doing what's traditional, but looking at the curriculum as this base of a tree, and then the branches being the students can take it anywhere they want. So how do they assess it? How do we have that dialogue, that running record, so to speak? And we've seen that it's been really inspirational for teachers who are running lecture series, and also students, because if you think about WeChat and other platforms in China, they've been able to really extend their knowledge and skills as a beacon of voice for others. Getting hundreds of thousands of hits and followers, et cetera. So we've seen that continue. But I think that my job or your job or others, when we're not teaching a standardized curriculum and we're not teaching to the SAT or ACT, then we need to remind folks who might be a little more conservative than their peers that there's a time for quizzes and exams, et cetera. But why don't we continue to try and push the envelope of teaching and learning and how we could assess the students and their capabilities, et cetera.
So one thing that's coming out is we've heard about a lot of exciting things that are happening that weren't happening before. We talk a lot about what the crisis has taken away, but the crisis has also given us some things. And many of our participants have asked, what do you think is going to happen when the crisis recedes and everybody goes back to school? Without worrying about a timetable, do you think it's going to revert to just the way it was before? Or do you think that some of the things that each of you has discussed might become part of the new normal in terms of what happens in school?
I'll jump in initially. I think that there are far too many opportunities that we have seen over the last 9 weeks with children having more agency to allow us to let it revert back perhaps to the way it was prior to COVID-19. I think it's incumbent upon us as professionals when the children come back into the building to really look at the way that we're going about engaging the children in the learning process. And I think that we certainly are really trying to identify what are going to be the takeaways that we want to keep. And we're looking at that in relation to spaces, learning spaces, access to technology, perhaps what's been quite a rigid model of delivery at school needs to be loosened up. We're thinking about flexible models of delivery, teaching staff who are doing incredible things with short video content input, and then children self-managing and moving away from that and having some choice. So voice, choice and ownership for children are absolutely essential. And there's certainly some things, Chris, that we would want to be thinking about so that we can retain those, because I think if we could, it would allow us to build on and reshape perhaps what learning has traditionally looked like within the four walls of a building.
I would just add to that, you know, we're looking at how can we continue to move people around, having people remotely accessible and available to us. I mean, rather than having this Middle East expert on our campus, wanted having them in the Middle East, where then they're working with the people they need to be working with, and having students there too. So those students who are passionate and able to then add a lot of value to these projects, they should be there. And then our program can be nimble and agile and remote for them to continue their education along through us and with us. And hopefully then including many other people.
Okay, from my observation, actually, for those, because what I observed is most from the public schools. Yeah, most of them just have this kind of expectation. Actually, everything will resume. Yeah, resume to the back to the normal. Yeah, that is back to the normal rather than new normal. However, from because those are public schools, they have to do things around the national curriculum, and they have this kind of prescribed content. And if they have any standard test that they have to follow, yes, so they have this kind of fear or worries about this kind of the content centered. However, I think that from the government, they got this kind of a strategic thinking that how can we use this technology and also the takeaways of this period experiments and try to incorporate them into this kind of regular schooling system. So although individual schools, they may not do, the individual public schools, they may not do a lot of things. However, we will see this will be kind of a new trend or direction from the government, from the top down. Yeah, try to push this more blended learning or more technology or this online based learning. Yeah.
I just have a question. Do you think that there's going to be a push from the top public schools to then be more available and sharing resources to then the lesser tier cities and then their schools? I mean, if you think about Beida Fuzhong and Renda Fuzhong, Beijing National Day, Beijing Normal Experimental, these top schools that yield then the best Gaokao or Zhongkao results, then is there going to be pressure from the government to them to then be sharing those resources virtually and or other for these students in different cities, districts, and schools with less resources and or support?
Yeah, I think this is the one kind of the one type of this sharing. Yeah, and also this is one type of this strategy, because they are doing this for on the national resource. They have already accumulated those resources from like Tsinghua affiliated schools, and from Shanghai they have already used those from those top schools. So this is one kind of possibility. They are required to share these key resources.
Young, do you have another point you want to make?
Yeah, I was just going to raise another point, but before that, I just want to quickly say this. I think you probably see, I think Scott has observed in the chat room about the different reactions as a large government system. and how do you react to this, and how this might change versus independent, more versatile school systems. But I think a good point what Xiangyan was raising is that what is considered normal education, return to normal, which is kind of interesting. I just wrote a blog about that. We cannot think online as a lesser cousin of normal, so that's abnormal. But it's interesting, the challenge. I just want to raise one new direction, and you may or may not answer this, but for other people to think about this, from what Chris was talking about, online is different. Well, we are going to rethink about paring down the traditional curriculum. It helps us to challenge the traditional practices and thinking about curriculum and pedagogy of teaching. I also want to say this creates a new opportunity for something schools have not been doing, have missing. For example, we talk about global competency, understanding human beings in other places. This is a great opportunity to do that. Developing digital competency, learning how to socialize online, how to self-regulate online, that has not been on the high end of this. And more, like Mina talking, more autonomy, more entrepreneurial thinking, more manage of your own learning. We did not have time to do all of those. I think this presents an opportunity to do that. And our final point is that we kept talking about family school connection. This is the time actually schools and family have to be connected and collaborating. And that's another place where we can explore different possibilities. And but I would get you back to our host, Chris, to determine if you want to pursue those questions. But I want to raise that for all our audience to think about new potentials, new possibilities, beside what we want to get rid of, but also what we can add to this whole new mix.
No, I'm happy for any of our guests to talk about any piece of that big, interesting set of questions.
Yes, I just want to share one a school case that is using this historical pandemic, this period as a teachable moment. Actually, from the principal and to their teachers, they have invented this kind of a school-based issue-based inquiry project week, because usually they got this kind of project week just for 1 week. They will have this kind of annual theme. However, I suggest them, okay, see, why don't we use this kind of as a kind of a natural inquiry, and for the students to do that. Then, so within 1 week, they designed a kind of a guiding framework for the different grades in primary. So for the primary one, they were dealing with how a human with animals. And later on, all been setting up or contextualized in this COVID-19. And in the 2 weeks, the whole school is just doing this kind of issue-based inquiry as a class-based, and then the group-based, and then they have the final project. So in this type of new school-based curriculum, and they just combined their regular school routine to do this project. However, and also include this as a new issues, and the students and the parents, they were very happy to join, and also for teachers, they felt very excited. So I think there are real cases they can do it if they would like to make it as a teachable moment and use it as a kind of potential for new type of learning or kind of other higher ends. Yeah.
I would just want to add that I think that we need to all wake up and see this as an opportunity that all the students and the faculty have to extend the knowledge and skills, the curriculum, to then outside projects that are going to be meaningful and change and better the world. We can no longer be thinking about how do we assess the students, again, through these quizzes and exams, where then we have these, this numerical data that we're going to then share with the universities, and all the students look the same, and the only thing to distinguish or differentiate them is going to be then that number, that figure. All these students are taking the exact same classes as their peers. I think we need to stop and wake up and think, how can this individual be their true and authentic self, where they can play to their strengths, follow their passions and interests, where then because they like design and art and math, then they're working with architects, but they're focused on projects that are going to be beneficial, perhaps working with the influx of people who are then migrant workers, so that there's a livable space there where there's good lighting and there's clean water and there's air circulation. I think that we need to wake up and break down the walls of the school. And during that school day, why are they even in our school? Why aren't they working with different people on different projects? And then they could be accessing their teaching and learning, their faculty remotely or in the face-to-face through office hours. I think that hopefully it doesn't go back to the normal. I think that we should look at this and be like, okay, we can do something different. We can do things more meaningful. And if we empower our students and we empower our faculty, they can change the world. I've seen it. I was ready to leave education till I stumbled on this school. And now I've woken up, you know what I mean? It's almost like a religious thing that you see that what students and faculty are capable if you empower them and you entrust them and you don't inundate them.
So one point that I want to make sure that we bring up, many of the comments in the chat are about what happens to the most marginalized of students, poor students, students from rural areas, students from marginalized groups, students with special needs. And those are very important questions. But I also think that it's very important that we not approach this from a deficit perspective, which I see a lot of in the United States. These are not students who are broken. They know a lot. Rural students actually know a lot that urban students do not. Poor families often know a lot and have tremendous tenacity and commitment to education that perhaps more affluent families don't. And I want to make sure that the empowerment that we talk about, where we're empowering parents and we're empowering students and we're empowering all the stakeholders to get together and reinvent what's going on in education, that needs to be empowerment that marginalized people have the same voice and the same sense of a lot to contribute as everybody else. So I just want to say a few things. We're getting towards the end. First, I want to thank the three of you as guests. It's not easy to come on to a show like this and to control what you want to say to make it headlines rather than long talks, and to have a conversation and to share what isn't working as well as what is working. And you've just been fabulous. This has been a great episode and a wonderful conversation among us. And this is exactly the kind of thing that we want to do with this initiative. Next week, we have another very exciting episode. The Commonwealth of Learning is a global group that cuts across all of these national boundaries and national systems. And they both are very active in adult capacity building, educator professional development, and also in open educational resources. So I think they have a lot of interesting models to contribute as we put together alternative ways of handling the crisis. I hope that those of you who are here this week will tune in. More details are in the blog section of the website about what that episode will be like. Something else that's happened that's exciting is that we're starting to get guest blog posts for the site. And Scott, do you want to just say briefly a little bit about that if somebody is thinking about doing a guest blog post for us?
Sure, absolutely. So if you go to silverliningforlearning.org and you click on the contact link at the very top navigation menu, there's a way to get in touch with us if you'd like to be a guest blogger. And we have a prompt paragraph there for you to respond to. And then you would just contact us and we'll set you up with an account and get you blogging. Thanks.
And again, in blogs, we're not looking for sort of a solution. We're looking for your thoughts about parts of models that seem to be working well that you'd like to share with other people. I have a student in our master's program who is very concerned about India, where she's from. And I said, well, why don't you do a blog post that talks about both the opportunities and challenges you see in India now? And I said, at the end of the blog post, put a way that you and other people who read it and agree with you can organize together. so that you can form a group out of this that moves to taking action. And I think that's a big goal that all of us have as organizers. It's great to have these episodes and to learn from one another, but we also have the opportunity to meet other people who have the same passions that we do, who complement one another in terms of what they know about what the solutions for different kinds of problems might be. And we really want to encourage you to go beyond the episodes themselves and see yourselves as stakeholders and having agency in shaping what's going on in this Silver Lining for Learning group. So think about blog posts, think about contacting people that you meet in chat, think about ways that we can all band together and make a big difference. So thank you all again for coming. We're excited about next week. We hope to get some blog posts in the meantime. And please tweet, 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 use social media, give us a plug. Thank you very much.